Nobody said no to Victor Moretti. Not in this city. Not twice. Victor had built his empire the way most men build fear. Quietly at first, then all at once. He had taken his father's crime family and stripped it down to something leaner, colder and far more precise. Every upscale restaurant in the city paid money to him. It was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was simply the way things worked, the same way gravity worked. Silently, without the need for explanation. Every restaurant paid. Every one. Except a small Italian place on the corner of Delancey and Fifth. A quiet, worn-down spot with red checkered tablecloths, hand-painted menus, and a waitress who had looked at Victor's collectors and said, calmly and without any apparent concern for what that meant, no. The restaurant was called Sal's. The waitress was named Cassie Carter. And Victor Moretti had decided it was time to handle this personally. Friday was the busiest night at Sal's. The dining room was full by 7. Cassie moved between tables with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of reading a room. She knew which customers needed more time, which ones were in a hurry, which ones were trying to impress a date. She had been working here for 2 years, and in that time she had never once been late, never dropped an order, never complained. She was refilling water glasses near the window when the door opened. Victor Moretti walked in like a man who owned the floor beneath every building in the city, because in many ways he did. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had not been bought off any rack. His jaw was clean-shaved. His eyes were dark and absolutely still. Behind him came 4 men in identical dark jackets, hands relaxed at their sides in the careful way that meant they were never truly relaxed. The dining room shifted. Not everyone knew who Victor was, but everyone felt the temperature drop. Cassie looked up from the water pitcher. Their eyes met across the room. His expression didn't change. Neither did hers. He chose the center table, the one most visible to every corner of the restaurant, and sat down without being invited. His men fanned out without being told. One stood near the kitchen door. One near the exit. The other 2 remained close to Victor like shadows that had learned to breathe. Cassie walked over. "Can I help you?" she said. Victor leaned back in his chair and looked her over the way someone examines a piece of furniture they are considering returning. "You can start by explaining something to me," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear clearly. "How does a woman who carries plates for a living think she's in a position to tell my organization no?" The nearest table went quiet. Then the next one. The silence spread like water soaking into cloth. Cassie said nothing. "What do you make in a week?" Victor continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a single folded bill. He opened it. $1. He placed it on the edge of the table with 2 fingers like it was a formal offer. "That's your tip. For your trouble." Someone at a corner table exhaled nervously. Cassie looked at the dollar. He looked at Victor. She picked up her notepad. "What would you like to order?" she said. Something flickered in Victor's expression. He had expected anger. He had expected embarrassment, maybe tears, maybe defiance he could crush in public. He had not expected this. A calm so complete it bordered on boredom. He reached across the table, took the glass of red wine that had been set by the previous customer and turned it slowly. Then he looked directly at Cassie and tipped it toward her. The wine poured across her white uniform in a long dark stain. The room went absolutely still. Victor gestured toward his shoes, black leather, polished to a mirror finish. "Since you're already holding a cloth," he said quietly, "you can get on your knees and clean those." Not a single fork moved. Not a single breath was drawn too loudly. Every person in that dining room was watching Cassie Carter stand in front of Victor Moretti with wine soaking through her uniform, and waiting to see what she would do. Cassie looked down at his shoes. Then she looked back up at him. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Or rather, the kind where the eyes were doing something else entirely. Something calm. Something calculating. "You made a mistake," she said softly. "Coming here." Victor's patience ended. He reached forward to take her by the chin. What followed happened so fast that the bodyguard standing nearest to the table would later struggle to explain exactly what he had seen. Cassie's left hand caught Victor's wrist mid-reach and rotated it outward. a clean, practiced motion that put immediate tension on the joint. Her right hand moved inside his jacket in the same breath, fingers finding the grip of his concealed pistol with the certainty of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She drew the weapon, chambered around with one smooth pull of the slide, and pressed the muzzle beneath Victor Moretti's jaw before the click of the chamber had finished echoing. 2 seconds. Maybe less. All 4 bodyguards drew their weapons at once. Cassie did not move. She did not flinch. She stood with her weight evenly balanced, her breathing slow, her eyes locked on Victor's with an expression of total and unhurried control. The muzzle did not shake. "Tell them to put the guns down," she said. Victor's jaw tightened. A vein moved in his temple. His eyes did a rapid professional sweep of the room, calculating angles, calculating odds, calculating whether any one of his men could reach her before she could act. The answer he arrived at was clearly not the one he wanted. He had trained men. She had moved faster than all of them combined. "Put them down," he said, his voice controlled and flat. 4 guns lowered to the floor. The most feared man in the city was standing at gunpoint in a small Italian restaurant, held in place by a waitress in a wine-stained uniform. Around the room, customers sat frozen, hands flat on their tables, eyes wide. A child near the back had buried her face in her mother's arm. No one moved toward the door. No one made a sound. Cassie leaned in slightly, voice low enough that only Victor could hear. "Now," she said, "we're going to have a conversation." She ordered his men to step back to the wall and keep their hands where she could see them. They obeyed. She instructed the restaurant customers to exit calmly through the front door, and the staff to take everyone to the basement. Within 3 minutes, the dining room held only Cassie, Victor, and 4 men standing very still against the far wall. She lowered the weapon but did not put it away. Victor straightened his jacket with deliberate calm. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "The government," Cassie said. She said it simply, without drama, the way someone states the obvious. And then she told him what she had never told anyone in this city. For 9 years, Cassie Carter had worked inside an elite federal protection unit, the kind that didn't appear in any public budget and wasn't named in any press release. VIP security, close quarters protection, hostage extraction, firearm retention. She had been trained to disarm people who were already pulling the trigger, to move through rooms others couldn't survive, to read a threat before it fully formed. She had been good at it. One of the best. And then she had discovered that 3 senior officers inside her own unit were taking payments from a foreign intelligence network, feeding information that had gotten 2 good agents killed overseas. She had built the case herself. She had taken it to the right people. And the right people had buried it, because the officers involved were connected to people who didn't want to be embarrassed. So she had disappeared. Changed her name enough. Taken a job in a city where no one looked for government ghosts. Working for an old man named Salvatore who needed someone he could trust. Her grandfather. Victor stared at her for a long moment. "The owner of this restaurant is your grandfather," he said slowly. "He built this place with 50 years of his life," Cassie said. "And I will not let anyone take it from him." Something moved across Victor's face. It was not rage. It was not embarrassment. It was something closer to understanding. The slow recognition of a man who had finally encountered a force he had not been prepared for. "You moved faster than my best people," he said almost to himself. "I know," she said. Victor was quiet for a while. He looked around the dining room, the overturned wine glass, the single dollar still on the table's edge, the guns on the floor. He looked at Cassie standing in her stained uniform with his own weapon held at her side. He had built his reputation on never showing weakness, on responding to every challenge with force that ended the conversation permanently. He had made examples of men twice Cassie's size for far smaller offenses than what she had done tonight. But standing in the emptied restaurant, something in him shifted. He had known fear his whole life, other people's fear of him. He had walked into rooms and watched grown men look at the floor. He had issued orders and seen them followed without question. He had believed for a long time that fear was the same thing as respect. Cassie Carter was not afraid of him. He had never been afraid of him. And in this moment, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Victor Moretti found himself genuinely interested in another person. He sent his men outside with a single word. They left without argument. "So what happens now?" Victor asked when they were alone. Cassie set his pistol on the table between them, a gesture that meant something. She was choosing to have a conversation instead of ending one. "That depends entirely on you," she said. She laid out her terms without hesitation, like someone reading from a document she had already written in her head. Sal's restaurant would never pay protection money. Not $1. Not ever. No criminal activity of any kind would take place inside or near this building. Every small business on this block, the dry cleaner, the flower shop, the bakery, the pharmacy, would be left completely alone. And no one in Victor's organization would ever again approach, threaten, or so much as make eye contact with a member of the restaurant staff. Victor let her finish. Then he leaned forward. "You understand what you're asking me to do. You're asking me to make an exception that every crew in this city is going to hear about. You're asking me to look like I backed down." "I'm asking you to make a decision," Cassie said. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and removed her phone. She set it on the table beside his gun. "This has been recording since you sat down. Audio and video both. I have your face, your voice, and approximately 7 statements that your own lawyer would advise you not to repeat." Victor looked at the phone. He looked at Cassie. For the first time in this conversation, something that might have been amusement moved at the corner of his mouth. "You had this planned," he said. "I had it ready," she said. "There's a difference. And if I agree to your terms? Then this recording stays with me and goes nowhere. One call to the right journalist changes that." Victor leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. A man doing math. A man recalculating. "Agreed," he said. He should have left then. He had agreed to her terms, which was already more than he had ever conceded to anyone. He should have stood up, walked out, and spent the next 2 weeks deciding how to frame tonight in a way that didn't damage him. He didn't leave. "I need something from you," he said. Cassie waited. He told her about the leaks. 3 months ago, his shipment routes had started reaching the wrong people. A rival family from the south side that had been quiet for years and suddenly wasn't. 2 of his most trusted captains had been ambushed in the past 6 weeks. The ambushes were too clean, too precise, too well-timed to be luck. Someone inside his organization was feeding information. And he had no way of knowing who, because every time he thought he had narrowed it down, another name on his short list had an alibi that held. "You have investigative training," Victor said. "I don't need someone who can fight their way into a room. I need someone who can think their way through one." "That's not my problem," Cassie said. "It will be. When they take me out, the power vacuum is going to hit every neighborhood in this city. Gang wars don't respect zip codes. Your grandfather's block is going to be in the middle of it." She was quiet for a long time. She knew he was right. She had seen what power vacuums did to ordinary people. She had worked the aftermath of 2 of them during her government years. The restaurants, the corner stores, the families who had nothing to do with any of it and got caught in the crossfire anyway. "One job," she said finally. "I find your leak. Then we're done." Victor nodded. Done. Cassie worked the way she always had, quietly, methodically, without leaving fingerprints. She didn't go near any of Victor's people directly. She traced the information leaks backward through timing and pattern, mapping which routes were exposed and when, cross-referencing the ambush locations against who had known what and when they had known it. It took her 11 days. The answer, when she found it, was the kind that made her stomach tighten. Not because it surprised her, but because it didn't. The mole was Marco, Victor's personal bodyguard. The man who had stood closest to him for 4 years. The man who knew every route, every schedule, every meeting location. The man whose loyalty Victor had never questioned because Marco had been there since before Victor took over. A holdover from his father's era. Marco had been selling information for 8 months. Long enough to plan. Long enough to build the kind of trust with the rival family that made him valuable. Cassie put together everything she had and went to the restaurant to contact Victor. She never got the chance. She was unlocking the back door of Sal's at 9:30 on a Tuesday night when the first of them appeared at the end of the alley. And then another, and then a third, stepping out from between parked cars and building shadows with the coordinated patience of people who had been waiting a long time. They were not Victor's men. She recognized the posture, corrupt officers, the kind who wore their badge like a mask. Someone had decided that letting Cassie deliver her findings to Victor was a problem. Someone had decided that both of them needed to disappear tonight, along with the restaurant. The orders were simple. Kill Cassie. Kill Victor. Burn the building. Cassie slipped inside before the first one reached the door. The lights went out. She had cut the power herself from the breaker box inside the kitchen. The one she had memorized on her third day of work, because she had always memorized the breaker box in every building she spent time in. Old habits. In the darkness, Sal's restaurant became a completely different place. Cassie moved through the kitchen without a sound, barefoot now. She had removed her shoes the moment the lights went out. She knew where every pot was hanging, where the floor dipped slightly near the freezer door, where the steam pipes ran closest to the ground. She knew the exact angle of moonlight that came through the small window above the prep counter. She knew which floorboards creaked and which ones didn't. They did not know any of these things. She guided the kitchen staff and 2 customers who had been finishing a late dinner into the basement with a single quiet instruction and a hand signal they somehow understood anyway. She heard them descend the stairs and pull the door closed behind them. Then she went back to work. She used the restaurant the way a surgeon uses instruments, with precise, unhurried intention. A burst of steam from the industrial pressure cooker she triggered remotely drove 2 men back from the kitchen entrance. A carefully opened freezer door in the dark created a confusion of cold air and shifting shadow that caused one of them to step directly into a floor-level storage rack, the crash of it bringing 3 others running toward the wrong room. She moved in the opposite direction every time, always a step ahead, always choosing the path they weren't watching. Victor had arrived 20 minutes earlier, drawn by a message Cassie had managed to send before the power cut. He had walked into the back of something he didn't fully understand, and for the first time in his life, found himself in a building where he was not the most dangerous person present. He pressed himself against the wall near the bar and watched a shadow move across the far side of the dining room with a silence and economy of motion that he had never seen in any of the trained people who worked for him. He watched Cassie Carter dismantle an operation in the dark like she was solving a puzzle she had already seen the solution to. He had thought after the night she took his gun, that he understood what she was. He understood now that he had only seen the beginning of it. There was a moment near the end when the math almost stopped working in Cassie's favor. She had cleared the kitchen. She had neutralized the main entrance. She was moving back through the dining room when she heard Victor's voice. A short, flat sound that was not quite a shout and was not quite a word but was clearly wrong. She turned. Marco was there. He had come himself. Maybe because he didn't trust anyone else with it, maybe because he had wanted the satisfaction. He had Victor against the far wall near the hostess stand, and he had a weapon leveled at a range that left no margin for error, and he was saying something to Victor in a low, quiet voice that Cassie couldn't hear across the room. She didn't need to hear it. He was already moving. Across the open floor of the dining room, around the end of the bar, into the angle of fire that Marco had left uncovered because he had never expected anyone to cross that much open space that fast. She fired once. A single, precise shot that ended the threat without ending the room. Marco went down. Victor stood against the wall for 1 full second without moving, which was the first time Cassie had ever seen him need a full second to process anything. Then the shadow moved behind her. She didn't hear it. She didn't see it. She was already turning when the sound came, not from her but from across the room. A single shot from Victor's direction, and the figure that had been raising a weapon 6 feet behind Cassie dropped before she had fully registered that it was there. Silence. They stood in the wrecked dining room, overturned chairs, broken glass, the smell of steam and spent rounds in the air, and looked at each other across the dark. She had saved his life. He had saved hers. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The sirens started in the distance. Not close yet but coming. Victor moved toward her through the scattered furniture. Why? He said. It was a short question but it carried everything. Cassie understood what he was asking. He wanted to know why she had crossed that open floor for him. Why she had risked herself for a man who had walked into her restaurant to humiliate her, who ran an organization built on fear, who was, by every measure she had ever used to evaluate a person, exactly the kind of man she had spent years working against. She gave him the honest answer. "I wasn't protecting you," she said. "I was protecting everyone who would have gotten hurt when this city went to war over your funeral." Victor was quiet. "There are families on 3 blocks around here," she continued, her voice even. "People who have nothing to do with you or Marco or any of this. A gang war doesn't care about that. It never does." He looked at her for a long moment in the near dark, the distant sirens growing steadily closer. "You really don't think about yourself at all, do you?" he said. "I think about the people who can't protect themselves," she said. "That's the same thing." Something in Victor's face changed. Not softened exactly, that wasn't the right word for a man like him. But something that had been hard and certain for a very long time became for just a moment less certain. He was used to people who wanted things from him. Money, protection, power, access. He was used to transactions. Cassie didn't want anything from him. He never had. In 9 years of building an empire on other people's fear, Victor Moretti had never once been judged by his choices instead of his reputation. Everyone who met him had already decided who he was before he walked into the room. Cassie had just walked into crossfire for him, and she still hadn't changed her mind about what he was. She had simply made a decision about what mattered more. That was something he did not know how to calculate. They walked out of the basement together after the last of the sounds had gone quiet. Cassie's grandfather, the staff, the 2 late-night customers who had spent 40 minutes holding hands with strangers in the dark and would probably remember each other for the rest of their lives. Salvatore looked at the dining room. The broken glass. The overturned tables. The long, dark streak on the floor near the hostess stand where things had come very close to ending in a completely different way. He looked at Cassie. She shook her head once, the small motion that meant, "I'll explain later. Everyone is safe." He nodded and put his hand briefly on her arm, then walked toward the kitchen without a word. Victor stood near what remained of the front entrance and watched the old man move through his damaged restaurant with a dignity that had nothing to do with power or fear or wealth. Just a man who loved the place he had built and trusted the person who protected it. He turned to Cassie. "Every restaurant and business on this block," he said. "Permanently. No one touches them. No one approaches them. No one even thinks about this block." "I know," she said. "That's not," he started then stopped. Started again. "I'm not negotiating. I'm not making an offer. I'm telling you what I've decided." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said again. And there was something different in it this time. Not agreement, not gratitude, but something closer to acknowledgement. The recognition of a decision made freely, without leverage, without a recording held over his head. Victor almost smiled. "You'll never be part of what I run," he said. It was not a question. "Never," Cassie said. "Good," he said. "That's exactly why I respect you." The sirens were close now. Through the front window, the first red and blue lights were painting the street in slow rotations. Cassie looked at the dining room one more time. The red checkered tablecloths still on the tables that hadn't been overturned, the hand-painted menus still in their wooden holders along the wall, the photo of Sal's father that hung behind the counter and had somehow survived the night without so much as a crack in the glass. The restaurant still stood. Victor was looking at the same photo. A man who had never noticed it before, looking at it now like it meant something. They walked toward the door together. Not because either of them had suggested it. Simply because they were both walking in the same direction and neither of them moved to walk ahead of the other. At the threshold, Victor reached down and took Cassie's hand. It was not a grand gesture. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and certain, the way both of them did everything. And for just a moment, standing in the ruined doorway of a small Italian restaurant on the corner of Delancey and Fifth, the most feared man in the city and the woman who had put a gun under his chin held on to each other like two people who had both been alone for a very long time and had finally, unexpectedly, stopped. They walked out into the night together. Behind them, the photo of Sal's father caught the last of the red and blue light and held it for a moment before the room went dark again. Some things, Cassie had always known, are not won with force. Some things are won by simply refusing to kneel. Thank you for watching.